Vanakkam. Hello friends. We saw in the previous episode of how the Pandya king with multiple names, Nedunjeliyan II, expanded and consolidated the Pandya territory, earning him the epithet Pannadu Thanda Pandiyan. His rule was established as between 50 and 75 Common Era by K.N. Sivaraja Pillai in his The Chronology of the Early Tamils. We have been exploring the early Cheras, Cholas and Pandyas based on the genealogy tables provided by KNS as the primary source for this reconstruction. Now going to the early Cholas, the contemporary Chola ruler who ruled from the seat of Urandai was Velpah Tadakkai Peruviral Killi, the literal meaning of his name being the Killi who held multiple spears in his hands. Now he was fourth in line after Mudithalaikko Perunar Killi. KNS shows how the Chola kingship grew in stature with every passing generation, starting with the conqueror of Urandai, Veliyan Tittan, who was merely a Velman, a Velir Magan, meaning a Velir chieftain of Veerai. His son Tittan Veliyan assumed the title of Ko, meaning the king, and earned the epithet Porvaikko Perunar Killi. The third in line adopted a still higher title, Mudithalaikko, the crowned king, the crown being the epitome of sovereign power. Mudithalaikko Perunar Killi, where Peru and Null were general epithets meaning greatness and good, and not giving the proper name of this ruler. Interestingly, a Chola ruler by the name Karikala appears in this third generation, and he is found ruling from a place called Alundur. During those early times, there were several branches of Chola kingship ruling from several places like Urandai, Kudandai, Paruvur, Vallam, Perundurai and Alundur, and KNS shows poetic references calling them Solar in plural form, denoting these several lines. In an Ahananuru poem 365, the poet Idayan Senda Kottanar sings, எழுவு திணித்தோள் சோழர் பெருமகன் விளங்கு புகழ் நிறுத்த இளம் பெரும் சென்னி. Here again, Ilam Perum meaning the young and great Chenni and no proper noun. He was one of the rulers of the strong-shouldered warriors, the Cholas. Paranar sings in an Agananuru poem, Kadum Pahatti Yanai Solar Maruhan Nedunkadir Nellin Vallam Kilavon. The Cholas, who possessed fearsome elephants, one of them who ruled from Vallam. Here the term Solar Maruhan meant either a son-in-law or a nephew, and the term Vallam itself denoted a region that was fertile with paddy. Of the Chola branches, Tittan and his descendants belonged to the Killi branch and ruled first from Veerai and then from Urandai, while Karikala I belonged to the Chenni family that ruled from Alundur. Through the words of Paranar in Nattinai, KNS shows how the Chenni line had humble beginnings. Ara Marbin Sirukol Senni Are Tanna goes a line. The phrase Sirukot Chenni, where Siruko meant a petty ruler, Chenni wearing the afla that was to become the insignia of the Cholas. Confined to the coast, the Chenni line took its expansion northwards through Kudavayil, which was in the erstwhile Tanjavur district, and KNS opines that it is this Chenni line that would have captured the forest of Arcade. Though they might have had an amicable relationship initially, as they grew in power and stature, the Killi and Chenni lines definitely faced internal rivalry, which was behind the disputes that occurred much later during the accession of Karikala the Great to the throne of Urandai. This Karikala the Great is identified as Karikala II by KNS. Karikala I, who we saw was a contemporary of Mudithalaikko Perunar Killi of the Killi line, is the first name identified in the Chenni line by KNS, and he also went by the epithet Perumpoon Chenni. Now KNS does an in-depth study of the Sangam poems to establish that there were two Karikalas, especially with the help of Paranar's poems. Paranar lived before the period of Karikala the Great, that is Karikala II, but in his poems, he mentions a Karikala before him. So it is obvious that he lived in between the two Karikalas, and KNS deduces that Karikala I should have been the grandfather of Karikala II in the context of that famed battle of Venni, which was sung by several poets. The poet Kazhathalayar and the poetess Venni Kuyatiyar have sung about a battle of Venni in which Karikala defeated the Chera king Peruncheraladan. In this battle, the Chera king receives a wound on his back, which was considered a shameful act in those days, where a wound on the back for a soldier in a battlefield implied that he received it when he was in retreat from the field of action. So this Chera king took his life by undertaking a Sallehanam, Vadakirindu Uyir Neethal, which meant the king stood facing north and fasted to death. So both these poets make a mention of this incident. While Paranar and Kapilar were contemporary poets, Kazhathalayar came in a generation before them and was acknowledged as such by Kapilar himself in a verse. Now Puranaraற்றுpadai is a Pathupattu work sung in praise of Karikala II by the poetess Mudathama Kanniyar. Here she sings about a battle of Venni. The poem begins, Mulaikol vida a mathirai nererena, Talaikol vetam kaliru attangu. The English version, like a fierce lion cub that was still being breastfed, that killed an elephant in a wink of an eye in his first hunt, with great strength, Karikalan, wearing a garland sweet to behold, ruined the two great kings with fierce effort at Venni. The Pandya king, wearing a strand braided with beautiful tender saw-edged leaves of the neem, and Cheran wearing a tender Palmyra frond stand. So these lines clearly describe the victory of Karikala II over the two monarchs, the Pandyas and the Cheras. And here the subtle reference of a lion cub on a first hunt is indicative that Karikalan II should have been very young, and probably this was his first battle. So while the poems of Kazhathalayar and Venni Kuyatiyar do not mention a Pandya king in the battle of Venni, Mudathama Kanniyar does not refer to the famed incident of Peruncheraladan fasting to death on the battlefield. KNS claims that this was obviously because there were two different battles happening at two different points in time. The existence of an antecedent Karikalan is also established through another Agananuru poem of Paranar, where he talks about how Karikalan faced a coalition of 11 Velir chieftains in a battlefield in a place called Vennivayil that was close to Alandur, which was his seat of power. Kaichina Moimbin Perumpeyar Karigal Arkali Naravin Vennivayil starts the poem and goes, Padinoru Velirodu Vendar Saya Moivali Arutha Nyanre Toyya Alundur Arpinum Peride. The coalition of 11 chieftains faced defeat at the hands of Karikala and ran away from the battlefield, even leaving behind their war drums. And the people of Alundur made fun of them and rejoiced at the victory of their king. The term Padinoru Velirodu Vendar Saya indicates a coalition of chieftains that must have included some rulers of the other Chola lines who had sought the support of a Vendan, a monarch, the Chera king. Again, in Agananuru poem 125, Paranar talks about a battle at Vahai Parandalai, and the words go, Viri ulai polinda pariyudai nalman veruvaru thanayodu vendu pulathirutha Peruvala Karigal Munnilai Sellar Suda Vahai Parandalai Adupera 9 குடையும் நன் பகல் ஒளித்த பீடியில் மன்னர் போல ஓடுவை மண்ணால் வாடை நீ எமக்கே. This is actually a beautiful Aham poem where the heroine chides the chilly winter air, the vaadai kaatru, that is making her miserable and yearn for her hero who has gone away in search of wealth. She says, my hero will be coming soon, and once he comes, O Droughtwind, you will run away as fast as the 9 chieftains ran away from the battlefield of Vahai, unable to face Karikalan's military might, even abandoning their parasols, the Kotra Kudai. So these two great victories of Karikala are not mentioned by Mudathama Kanniyar in the Puranaraற்றுpadai, which fully sings the praise of Karikala II. Neither are these battles mentioned by other contemporary poets of Karikala II. Why? Cheras points out that it was because these battles were won by a predecessor of Karikala II, his grandfather Karikala I. That the hero of these two battles of Venni should have been an anterior Karikala is also established by a thought-provoking hypothesis put forth by Cheras. In the two battles in question, the protagonists are Valers, meaning they were fellow clansmen. Initially, they would have been jealous that one of their own was rising above them in might and power, and this would have prompted them to go to battle with Karikala I. But by the time of Karikala II, his supremacy was very well established, and his fellow warriors would not have dared to raise against him. The time period of Karikala I is given between 1st century Common Era and 25 Common Era, and yet another Agananuru poem of Paranar also helps establish this timeline. In the Agananuru poem 196, Paranar refers to the sad incident of the chieftain Mingili's eyes being poked out by the fearsome courser in war, and how his daughter Unmingili approached Tidian, the commander of Karikala I, and sought revenge. This altercation took place at Arundur, from where Karikala I was ruling. தந்தை கண்கவின் அழித்ததன் தப்பல் தெருவர ஒன்றுமொழி கோசர் கொன்று முரண்போகிய கடுந்தேர் திதியன் அழுந்தை கொடுங்குழை அன்னி மிங்கிலியின் இயலும். Now we saw how Mingili was the commander of Nannan and how he had fought at the battle of Pali and killed Einan, who was the commander of the second generation Chola ruler Porvaiko Pernarkilli. So Mingili's daughter, seeking out the help of Karigala I, who belonged to the rival clan of the Chennis, to seek revenge for her father, makes sense. And in this battle, the commander of Karigala I, Tidian, routs the armies of the Ondrumori Kosar. So by this time, that is the third generation, the Chenni line should have been competing with the Killi line for supremacy. As the Chenni family of Arundur carried on their territorial expansion along the coast in the northerly direction towards the Palaru basin and beyond, these regions were known as Neidalankanal, that is the region of the seaboard from the mouth of the Kaveri going northwards. Karigala I, alias Perumpun Chenni, was succeeded by his son Uruvahpakter Ilanjet Chenni, while his contemporary of the Killi line, Mudithalaiko Perunar Killi, was succeeded by his son Velpach Tadakai Peruviral Killi. Peruviral Killi's rule came to an abrupt end. He waged a war against his contemporary Chera king Nedunjeraladan, and in this battle that took place at Por, somewhere on the upper reaches of the Kaveri, both these kings lost their lives. Cheras deduces that the intention to capture the regions of Kongu should have led to the head-on battle between these two kings, and the poet Kazhathalayar sings a heart-wrenching poem in Purananuru that goes, Varudar Tangi Amar Mihal Yavadu. The English translation: in the battle at Por, after all the soldiers fell, the kings conducted an arapor. An arapor meaning a one-on-one duel in which both of them lost their lives. Their parasols and war drums lie unattended. The ghouls are dancing in the battlefield, smearing the blood of the soldiers onto their tresses. The vultures prey on the dead, and the death drums, the Anandal Pare, are playing to comfort the wounded and the dying. Here lie the two great kings. Let their fame spread far and wide. But what will become of their countries? Laments the poet. Paranar also sings of this battle, presenting a heart-wrenching sight. Elephants and horses lay dead, pierced by arrows, as were hundreds of chariot-riding soldiers, and above all, the two kings. சாந்து அமை மார்பில் நெடுவேல் பாய்ந்தன வேந்தரும் பொருது கழத்து ஒளிந்தனர் இனியே என் ஆவது கொல்தானே. What will become of the two states without their kings? So Velpach Tadakai Peruvirakilli dies in this battle fighting the Chera king Nedunjeraladan without leaving an heir apparent to the seat of Urandai. Now, Uruvapakte Chenni, who succeeded Karigala I to the throne of Alandur, was a very brave warrior. He was in charge of the coastal territories of the Cholas and hence earned the epithet Neithalankanal Chenni. Paranar talks of his fame and might in a Puram poem which belongs to the Vanjitine, Vanji referring to a king going to battle to annex new territories or to protect his own territories from aggressors wearing the Vanji flower. And here the Thurai, the subdivision, is known as Kottravallai. Vallai meaning a ulakkai, a pound or a pestle, and Kottravallai was a form sung by women while pounding with a pestle and mortar, singing the praise of their king. The poem begins, Vaal valandara marupattana, sevvanathu vanappu pondana, Taal kalangola kadal paraindana, kollettin maruppu pondana, தோல் துவைத்து அம்பின் துணை தோன்றுவ நிலைக்கு ஓரா இலக்கம் போன்றன. Your blood-stained sword that has seen many battles resembles the red sky. The anklets dashed with the enemy's legs and broke and look like the sharp horns of a killer bull. The holes in your armor made by the piercing arrows resemble the stable ains. The horses, which are maneuvered left and right by pulling on the mouth pit, have left the horse's mouth blood-stained, making it look like the mouth of a tiger bringing home its prey. The male elephant's sharp tusks have become blunt, breaking down the enemy's fortress walls, and they roam about in anger, looking like the god of death. And it ends, Niye alangu ulai pariya ivuli, polan தேர்மிசை பொலிவு தோன்றி, மாக்கடல் நிவந்து எழுதரும் செஞ்ஞாயிற்று கவினை மாதோ. And here you come, O handsome king, riding a golden chariot, drawn by bedecked horses, looking like the red sun rising above the ocean. Paranar was probably the first poet to use the phraseology of the rising sun, the Udaya Suryan, to denote a ruler, and maybe later this was taken on by the Vedic priests who assigned the Cholas with a solar lineage during medieval times. The victories of Uruvapakte Chenni over a forest chieftain and a northern fortress earned him the title Serupadi Erinda Chenni, where Seru meant enemy and Padi meant fortress. With the Killi line having no heir apparent after the death of Velpaktadakai Peruvirar Killi, the ruler of the Chenni line, Uruvapakte Chenni, ascended to the throne of Urandai. This seems to have led to much bitterness and animosity that later on turned into open conflict between the Killi and Chenni branches. Now, Chenni must have been quite advanced in age when he took control of the seat of Urandai, and though through his superior might and leadership he effectively controlled the kingdom, his rule was very short-lived. At the time of his death, violence erupted, effectively stalling any chances of his son and heir apparent Karikala II from peacefully assuming the Urayur throne. So how did Karikala II emerge as the all-powerful monarch of the early Chola dynasty? We will continue to explore in coming episodes. Vanakkam.